I know what you're thinking. Really? Another video on YouTube about cornhole boards? What makes mine any different? Well, good question. And since I have to answer, it's not an instructional video, the boards aren't done cheaply, and I get quite detailed and fancy with the build quality of these boards. The first part to that last point is I like to run all four sides of the 2x4s through the planer to get square corners and a good clean surface. I've seen a lot of really nice boards out there, mostly homemade, and while very nice, my eye always gets drawn to the bare end of the 2x4 that always stares at me in the face while playing. So to solve this, I like to build mine with mitered corners, similar to how a picture frame is built. Some might argue this isn't that strong of a joint for the abuse cornhole boards go through, and sure, that might be correct, but I figured with enough glue on the corners, plus the top being glued and screwed to the 2x4s, it's plenty strong. I thought about adding dowels or other forms of joinery, which I may do on other boards, but for these, I just went with good old-fashioned wood glue, and so far, they're holding together just fine. So after a little filler, just to make sure those corners look perfect, I move on to sanding those corners up real good and get them ready for the top. Speaking of the top, for that I use 3/4 inch maple plywood. I like this type of plywood because it's super smooth and easy to get at my local big box store. I have tried using oak plywood because I like the look of it, but maple just seems to give a better finish for that smooth cornhole top. I first start by cutting the plywood in half widthwise with my track saw, then again lengthwise, being sure to cut a little big so I can use the router with a flush trim bit to get them perfect once attached to the frame. After a little dry run test fit to make sure all is good, we can move on to pocket holes. I'm trying to convince my son here that it's fun to drill pocket holes, but he's not having it. I don't use a lot of pocket holes here because I'm not a big fan of how they look, but they are a very fast and effective way of attaching the top. So just a few and we move on. I add a lot of glue to the underside of the top, throw the frame on, slap in those pocket screws, tighten down a few clamps just for tape measure, and then it's hurry up and wait. On to the next day, after all that glue is nice and dry, I take them out of the clamps, and more clamps. I like to use this many clamps to ensure that the top is nice and tight to the frame, so I end up with almost no seam, which you can really see in the next step as I'm cleaning up those plywood edges with the flush trim bit on the router. After a flush trim bit, I switch over to a 1/4 inch roundover bit and hit those top edges again for a nice smooth finish. A quick cleanup from that messy job, and I can move on to the hole and cornhole. I can never remember this measurement. I have to Google it every time. So for those of you curious what the measurement is, the center of the hole is 9 inches from the top and 12 inches from each side, or center. And the hole size is 6 inches. Now I'm sure I could add a dumb joke here, but I'll let you use your imagination. After a little one-way game of frisbee with the camera, I can move on to the legs. Just like the frame, I run these through the planer to get them cleaned up before rounding the top. For that, I use a small paint can as a template, then cut the bulk off with the bandsaw, and finally clean them up on the spindle sander. After I drill the pivot hole in the leg, I measure and drill the hole in the frame. I have to admit I made a little mistake here. I should have added a small shim between the leg and the top for clearance because the legs were a little tight to pull out. It was an easy fix on the sander, but a step that could have been eliminated had I just tossed a small shim in there to begin with. Time to tear them all apart and start every woodworker's favorite step, sanding. I'll try not to bore you here, but I run through all the grits, clean up all the corners, and carefully sand the top to make sure not to burn through the top veneer. Okay, finally it's time to start my actual favorite step of any project, finishing and detailing. Here I'm spraying on polyurethane. I give the bottom and legs 2 thick coats and the top 1 coat before adding the decal, and then later add 5 coats on top of those. Sorry for the lighting in this shot, but now we move on to decals. For these, I was asked to make these patriotic, so after many ideas, I landed on these 2. I cut these out on my plotter using some pretty old vinyl and some pretty old transfer tape, so you might see us struggling here to get the decals to stick to the transfer tape. But thanks to my little helpers, we eventually got it and they turned out awesome. My son loves being in front of the camera. He gets so excited knowing that he's going to be on YouTube. And my daughter, as you can see, is a worker. She just wants to put her head down and get the work done. So after a couple high fives and a couple thank yous, I get started on those additional coats of poly, being sure to alternate spray pattern on each coat. With the poly all dry, I can move on to assembly. With the lag bolt in and the leg on, you can see those legs moving much better now. Before moving on, there's just one more thing to add. LED lights. A few screws and some double-sided tape, these boards are ready for action. Now if you'll excuse me, I need to show the kids how to really play some cornhole. Oh, I almost forgot. Please don't forget to hit those like and subscribe buttons. Thank you.